Your gut is not always right. I do want to say that it's not always right. But the reason that so often it is right and that it feels right is because, again, it is your subconscious. It's information that you have absorbed and experience that you have absorbed that you're not consciously thinking about it, but your body is sort of ahead of you in understanding that it is correct.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Was It Chance, the podcast about embracing opportunity and taking intentional risk for your creative life. I'm Heather Vickery.
And I'm Alan Seals. Heather and I started out as two perfect strangers who met by chance and embraced opportunity. Listen in as we chat with other successful people about the risks they've taken to put themselves on a path to creative success. Heather, who do we have today?
Oh gosh, I am super excited. We have Joanne Lipman here with us today. And Joanne is a best-selling author and pioneer journalist who began her career reporting for the Wall Street Journal, rising to the position of deputy managing editor, the first woman to attain that post, I might add. She subsequently was the founding editor-in-chief of Conde Nast Portfolio magazine. Ooh, this is an amazing bio, Joanne. Was chief content officer of Gannett. She was an editor-in-chief of its USA Today and the USA Today Network, encompassing the flagship publication, plus 109 metro newspapers, including the Detroit Free Press, the Des Moines Register, and the Arizona Republic. In that role, she oversaw more than 3,000 journalists and led the organization to 3 Pulitzer Prizes.
Just 3.
Just 3. No big deal.
NBD.
She's served as the editor-in-chief of USA Today, USA Today Network, Conde Nast Portfolio, the Wall Street Journal's Weekend Journal, leading those organizations to, just a mere 6 Pulitzer Prizes. She's also an on-air CNBC contributor and Yale University journalism lecturer. I don't do this as fast as Alan does. Alan can do this in like 2 seconds, but y'all got me today. Her book, That's What She Said, What Men and Women Need to Know About Working Together, was a #1 bestseller, and she is now here to talk about her brand new book, Next, The Power of Reinvention in Life and Work. And we are super excited to have you here, Joanne. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Heather.
You didn't give the final note that I wrote in there.
Joanne, youdabomb.com.
There we go. There we go.
Thank you, Alan and Heather.
If you're reading verbatim, you got to include debomb.com. That's in there.
I can't read it not verbatim because I didn't write it. You wrote it because you know Joanne. And I read it before right now, but also I don't have it memorized. So.
That's true. I don't have it memorized either. Joanne, it's so nice to see you again.
Oh, it's great to see you again. It's been a long time since before COVID. Yeah.
I don't remember before COVID. Before COVID doesn't exist. BC. BC. There you go. Yeah, we are. Anyway, gosh.
So the two of you met through Google Talks, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because she came in and did That's What She Said, and she did some other political journalism talks as well. And I actually think that's a wonderful place to sort of dive in because you, as a career, like we just spent a good 6.5 hours reading your bio.
That is unnecessary.
Well, it wasn't even the whole bio because you've just done thing after thing after job, and it's all successful. And it's all, looking back, you've left this trail of just amazing creative success in your wake. And so starting at the very beginning of all of this, where... I guess, did you sort of have the impetus, the gumption, the desire to not do the stereotypical find a career and stick with it until you retire 30 years later?
Yeah, so it's such a funny question because everything you read to me sounds like one career. I know it sounds to the outside world like multiple careers and doing different things, but essentially I have always thought of myself as a journalist. And it's, a journalist who has done a lot of different ways of expressing journalism, whether it's book writing or television or newspapers or whatever. But where did it all start? It actually, I have to say, started when I was 7 years old.
I love that.
And I read a book called Harriet the Spy. Are you familiar with that book?
Yes, I have 2 children, 2 small children.
Oh my God, it's like the greatest book ever. So it's about, for those who don't know, everyone should read it. It's about I think she's 11, Harriet. And she's a little girl who spies on her neighbors and her friends and writes it all down in her composition notebook. And when I read that book the first of many times when I was 7, and I begged my mom, I said, get me a composition notebook like Harriet has. And I spent the next 5 years, probably, like spying on my big sisters with their boyfriends and my neighbors who were arguing, and you name it, my Hebrew school teacher. And I like wrote down everything. And I wanted to be a spy. And I guess it was when I hit middle school. I think it was when I was in 6th grade. I realized that this was actually a transferable skill to a thing called journalism. And I started, I guess that was a slightly healthier avenue than like, listening to my sister with her boyfriend. You know what I'm saying? So, so yeah, from that point on, I actually was just really, I always loved to write. And I was always extremely curious, very curious. And I felt like I had a short attention span. Like I really enjoyed the idea of like diving in and learning about something and then diving into something else and being able, like it always felt fresh. So I guess that's why to the outside, my career looks like I've done a lot of different things. But to me, it's really been applying exactly the same skills and curiosity and writing and looking for themes and looking for commonalities in different things that I'm reporting on. And it's just all using that in different formats, but it's using the same skill set.
You must be a manifesting generator in human design. Do you know human design? I'll bet you are.
I'm not sure what that means, but I like the sound of it.
Human design is cool.
Yeah.
We could talk about it some other time if you'd like. It's essentially, so it's a little bit like a personality. It's not a test at all. Think of the Enneagram, things like that, but just how we're innately designed to move through the world and process. And when you talk about that sort of multi-passionate, short attention span, that tells me I think you're a man, Jen. If anybody's curious, hit me up. No, I love this. I love that you were this avid reader at the age of 7, that you felt this passion for something and decided to explore it. And I particularly love reminding folks that you can apply your skills in lots of different ways and achieve lots of different things. So I'm really curious, at what point, essentially, what chance did you embrace that took you from being a little kid spying on your sister and writing in your composition notebook to actually starting to become an actual journalist?
Yeah. So, I started writing when I was in middle school for the school paper, and I did that in high school, but I actually wasn't sure what kind of medium I would go into. I knew I liked the media, plural, but wasn't sure where I was going. But I think what really the key moment, the pivotal moment was when I was a freshman in college, and I did write for the school paper. And I was able to get a summer job working as a copy girl at my local suburban newspaper in New Jersey. And that led me to getting an internship for no money at a dying magazine, Saturday Review magazine, when its last gasp of breath, gave me an unpaid internship when I was, I guess, a sophomore in college. And it was in New York City, and I lived in New Jersey, and I used to commute with my dad, who had read the Wall Street Journal from before I was born. It landed on our driveway every morning. I never once ever picked it up and looked at it until I started commuting on the bus with my dad every day, and obviously pre-iPhone days. And out of sheer desperation and boredom, I picked up his Wall Street Journal and started reading it. And I fell in love because that time, the paper was black and white, but oh my God, the writing was so colorful. It was literally like the best writing I'd ever read. And the other thing that I realized, and this was such an aha moment, I realized when I started reading it every day on this commute, that what looks like sort of boring individual business stories is actually serialized drama. And I realized, like, companies don't do anything. People do things. And so you'd be right. It's like a serialized version of what is Carl Icahn, the corporate raider, going to do today, and what's going to happen tomorrow. And I really got into the storytelling and also the beautiful writing on the front page, which was just the best I'd ever seen. And so that became my goal, was to get this internship at the Wall Street Journal. And I really applied myself through college with that goal in mind. And I ultimately did get the internship. And then I was fortunate enough that they hired me when I graduated. So I literally started there like immediately after college and stayed for 22 years.
Wow.
So she might stay in one place for a minute, Alan.
Hey, listen, I don't make any assumptions about people's ages and, starting in college, right? No, that's so cool. And I know very little about the publishing side and about the journalism side because it's entertainment in a way, right? Like it's media, it's mass media. And I guess you said you were attracted to the writing and the storytelling of the news stories and then move into editing. Do all editors, I guess, first off, do all editors have an experience? Do they have to have experience in writing? Do you have to be a good writer to know if you're reading a good story?
Yeah, oh, that's such a cool question because actually journalists come from different strengths. And so my immediate interest came from sort of writing and storytelling. There are people whose immediate interest is in digging and in doing the reporting piece of it. And they have to, it's very hard to find someone who is equally talented in both of those two disciplines. And so, so generally you come in stronger in one and learn the other. And so, people who come in who are amazing at digging don't necessarily have the same storytelling skills. But so these are things that you learn. So, yeah, I mean, and there are editors who were never actually writers. They are really different skills. My particular skill that helped me as an editor was something that was actually very inborn in me. So I did not recognize it as a skill. But I always was able to conceptualize ideas. So I was able to look at 5 different disparate things that were happening in the world and see a common thread and be able to conceptualize, oh, there's a story, there's a trend that's coming up. And that was just something that I think I was born with. I take no credit for it. Thank you, Mom and Dad.
It's a pretty great skill.
But it was something that really, really helped me. I actually never had any desire when I was a kid or even when I started my career, never wanted to be an editor. I just wanted to be a writer. I was actually dragged kicking and screaming into editing. It was not something I wanted to do. And I was at the Wall Street Journal. I was young. I don't even know if I was 30 yet. And I was pregnant. I remember that. And my boss, Paul Steiger, was like, you're like running around all over the place doing this reporting. I want you to try editing. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. And then the first story I edited, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And the reason that I loved editing is because exactly what I was just talking about, because I always had a million story ideas and not enough time to execute all of those ideas. And then I realized as an editor that you can spread those ideas around and other people can write them and you can help to shape them, but you're not doing the time-intensive months of, writing and reporting, et cetera, before you get there. So it was an ability to kind of do the parts of the job that were like pretty much the most fun.
So the first thing, when you sit down at your editor desk, the first thing I know you said was you turned to all your people and you said, get me more pictures of Spider-Man.
Absolutely. Of course.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
That's what every editor does.
Your J. Jonah Jameson. That's what I know about editing.
I don't even know how you get these thoughts in your head. Sometimes I feel like a little printout, a little Alan Brain printout would just be fascinating.
Listen.
How is that where you go?
Word association. Okay. He's an editor.
He's an editor.
I know,
right.
I mean, I know. He was an editor. I know that. But still, okay.
That's all I know about the actual world of editing is get me more pictures of Spider-Man. So this is all fascinating to me.
Spider-Man, yes. Well, Joanne, we mentioned that in my long but amazing bio that I shared, that you became the deputy managing editor over at the Wall Street Journal, and you were the first woman to attain that post, which I think is incredible. I'm wondering what chance put you there, and also kind of what was that like? I imagine it was a bit of a boys' club back then.
Yeah,
in journalism.
Yeah. It still is.
Well, I'll tell you something. When I joined the Wall Street Journal, when I was an intern, before I joined, when I was an intern, there were so few women in the newsroom that there was literally not a ladies' room in the newsroom.
Wow.
There were these lady receptionists up front, and there was this tiny little, essentially guest ladies' room with maybe 2 stalls or something. And they started at the time when I joined. They started hiring a lot more women. And I still vividly remember you would be at deadline time, right? Everybody's crunching to like get their stories finished. And suddenly we had more women, and there'd be this line snaking out of the ladies' room, and like women standing in line and screaming at the women in the stalls, "Hurry up and pay! I'm on deadline. I got to get back to my desk." But, it's not like that. Not like that anymore. But
it's not. That's good. I feel like that's progress.
That was progress.
You can't mark.
We're going backwards. I don't know. Maybe women's restrooms are the next thing to go.
Hopefully not.
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned for more of the episode. And now we're back.
But the truth is that I had an amazing experience at the Wall Street Journal. My bosses were men. They were amazing. My mentors were all men. They were phenomenal. And I would say that the key factor, one of the very key factors for me actually was Paul Steiger, who ran the paper, and his deputies. So these people were all my bosses. When I had 2 babies at home, because my kids were 2 years apart, and I had these little kids, and I was working as an editor on Page One, and they offered me a promotion to like go run the London bureau, and I was like, no, because I'm overwhelmed here, and I want to stay doing what I'm doing. And then they offered me another promotion, and I said no. They offered me another promotion, I said no. And this went on for almost 5 years. And so to me, this is the key, and that every boss should know, and I try and pay this forward, is they never took me off the list. Most women, if you say no to a promotion, you are immediately mommy tracked, right? You are like, she has no ambition, she's not going anywhere, and you're written off. They don't come back to you again. And I didn't appreciate it at the time, how unique and amazing it was that these men, all men, kept me at the top of the list whenever there was an opportunity, and they waited for me to say no, but they didn't then cross me off. And so ultimately, after almost 5 years, my son was going into kindergarten. My younger child was going into kindergarten. And Paul Steiger said, would you like to create a brand new 4th section for the Wall Street Journal? It was a 3-section paper, like brand new 4th section. You get to create it from scratch. And my kid now is going to, kindergarten. And I was like, hell yes. Yes, I would.
Yes.
But for most women, that was so rare that somebody would do that. And for most women, they would have been written off years earlier than I was. And had they not done that, I definitely would not have had the career I've had. And I definitely wouldn't even be sitting here with you guys today. I mean, it made all the difference.
That's really cool.
Really cool.
And obviously, I think speaks to why you stuck around in the Wall Street Journal for, what did you say, 22 years?
22 years.
Yeah.
I was very happy there.
Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah, so very happy. And then obviously a big choice and a big decision and a big chance to leave that very cushy, happy job where you're turning down 5 promotions. Wait, what is the Jewish thing? May we all be so lucky. Whatever.
Yeah, that. Yes, that.
Yes, that. Right. So you're leaving. 22 years is an, I guess a non-traditional amount of time before you switch jobs then. And when did you start like going out on your own? You're like a very well-known speaker. You're getting hired to present on these things. You're presenting on journalism. You're writing books. Of course, we've got the book
Next
that we can talk about. I knew you initially when you came in to talk about That's What She Said, which I also want to talk about because that's gender-specific stuff overlapping on what we were just saying. So I guess my original question then, after 22 years... I ramble a lot. We'll get
I was
used
like,
to it.
do you remember it?
Oh,
I'm just curious.
Oh, yeah, the Allen printout. I see my own printout, and I know to go back. But yeah. So the 22-year mark hits, and you're like, now's time for the next step. Why and how and what chances did you have to overcome or did you take to like make that next step and increase your success?
It was a very, very hard step to take and a very risky step to take. But I think there were 2 things. I mean, first and foremost was that I was presented with an opportunity. What happened was Conde Nast, which is the company that owns Vogue and Vanity Fair and The New Yorker. Top executives there had been actually talking with me, and this was actually not uncommon, that you would meet with people from other publishing companies and they would talk about various things. And they were talking to me about, like, what would you think about, like, should Conde Nast launch a business magazine? And I was like, hell yes, you should, because, like, I'm a magazine junkie. And I could see what was happening. You know, this was the rise of the 24/7 news cycle, right? Now the internet is exploding and the news cycle is getting faster and faster and faster. And what was happening, I felt like things were getting lost in that really speeded up news cycle. So, for example, I remember thinking, you know, like, the guy was the chairman of Lincoln Center. There'd be like a big article about what he was doing. And then separately in the business section of, like, the New York Times, there would be an article about this big hedge fund manager. And they're the same person, but nobody was connecting the dots. I was like, we need to connect the dots on a business that has such a huge influence on society and on culture. And I want to put it all together. And Cy Newhouse, who actually owned Conde Nast, who was this really amazing, eccentric, amazing guy, he invited me over for lunch one day, which that alone was just so cool because he was a little bit reclusive. And we had this long conversation about whether Conde Nast should do this magazine. And essentially at the end of it, he said, come to Conde Nast and create the magazine you're talking about. And It was just, I was blown away. And but I was very happy at the Journal. I really was not sure that I wanted to leave, but this was very enticing. And it ultimately, the decision point for me came actually when my husband said to me, when I was, like, stressing over this, as I do over many things, my husband said, when you talk about this hypothetical magazine, I see your body language. I see the way you light up, and I see how excited you get about it. And I haven't seen that part of you in a really long time, talking about your work. And it was like a light bulb moment, you know, that it was like, okay, like, it's a risk going into the unknown from someplace that felt like family and felt very secure. But I decided to take the leap. The other thing, though, I do want to mention, because I also talk about this in the book Next, on the power of reinvention, was that I was also having a little PTSD from, I was in the Trade Center on 9/11 because the Wall Street Journal office was across the street, saw a lot of horrendous things. We had a lot of issues. I was with a colleague, and, you know, we saw a lot of things that no human being should ever see. Our building was almost destroyed. We were out of the building for almost a year. It was a very traumatic time. And then before the year was up, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Wow. So then I went through another year of treatments for that. And luckily, knock on everything is healthy. But exactly, no kidding. But in Next, I actually have a chapter on something called post-traumatic growth. And what post-traumatic growth is, after you have been through a trauma, there are ways to work through it, not to bounce back because you can't get back to what you were, but to bounce forward, which is to grow. And one of the signs of post-traumatic growth is seeking new opportunities and being open to different experiences than you were before. And I think I was kind of a classic example of that. It's interesting because I was with a colleague, a friend who at the time was the design director of the Journal. We were together going through this pretty horrendous, very traumatic experience. And both of us we were both very happy at the paper, and we both ended up leaving within a couple of years. Wow. Yeah, for new things. Yeah.
That makes so much sense to me. Post-traumatic growth. That's not the first time I've heard that term, but it's the first time I've heard it described in that way. And reinvention feels like, that's the topic. I'm curious what the impetus was for writing this book. I might have a theory, but I'm really curious because everyone I know is in a reinvention space.
Yes.
Because of COVID.
Yes.
So I don't know if that was what prompted this book, but yeah, it's what everyone needs.
Yes, and I love that you said that because that is why I wrote the book. Exactly. I wrote the book for this moment in time when, in the wake of the pandemic, like so many people are rethinking their lives and their careers, and we're like rethinking our relationship to our jobs. And there was sort of no guidebook to get there. And literally, the genesis of the book was 3 years ago. It was the beginning of the pandemic. And if you recall, at the very beginning of the pandemic, when knowledge workers like us were sent home, mid-March. And I remember thinking, well, maybe by the end of March, we'll all be back again, right? And right? Remember that? Remember that?
Yeah, I remember when Broadway shut down for 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Right?
Yeah.
School was closed for 2 weeks, and we were like, "Oh man, okay."
What are we gonna do for
yes, 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
And I remember I actually had a business trip planned for March 29th, and I'm like, "Oh, by then we'll be fine." Yeah.
Yeah.
And but anyway, by April 1st rolls around, and you kind of realize, "Oh my gosh, we are in this for the long haul." And what does that mean? And of course, I was at sea, and my whole family were like, "Oh my gosh!" And I was initially, I'm thinking, selfishly, personally, like, "Oh my God, what am I going to do? And what does this mean?" And but then I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was actually April 22nd. I have the email. I woke up in the middle of the night, and with this thought that, oh my God, all of us, this is not a me situation. This is like the entire world. Like, we don't know when this pandemic is going to end, but when it does, we're all going to have to figure out what is the new normal. There's no guide to help us figure this out. That's like my purpose in life. Like, I was put on this earth to figure this out. And literally that day I started reporting the book that became next, The Power of Reinvention in Life and Work.
What about the other? I mean, you've written several books.
Yeah.
Strings Attached, which you co-authored, and That's What She Said, What Men Need to Know and Women Need to Tell Them About Working Together. Why even go to writing your own books in the first place? Because you're investigating, you're journalisming, you're editing, you're getting more pictures of Spider-Man, and then why start writing down words in your own books?
Yeah. I had always wanted to write books, like from when I was a kid. Though when I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be a novelist. And then I realized I have no skill writing fiction at all. But what led me to writing books was actually the first book was Strings Attached. And that was because of, and I know you said my career looks like strength to strength, but you know what? We all have flameouts. And I had a big one, which was after the financial crisis. I was running this magazine at Conde Nast. And after the financial crisis, advertising fell apart. The magazine closed. So suddenly for the first time in years and years and years, like, one day I've got a giant job and the next day I'm unemployed. And so I'm thinking, like, what am I going to do? And, it was a really, really difficult time. But during that time, one of the things that happened was completely unrelated to that was I got word about my childhood music teacher passing away. And my childhood music teacher, I was as a kid, I was a very serious viola player. I know it's a weird instrument, but it's the best. But I was super serious about it. I practiced for hours. When I went to college, I was in the symphony and I took lessons. I was at Yale, and I actually took lessons at the Graduate School of Music at Yale, and had been very serious all the way through. And this teacher was super influential. He was my teacher from the time I was 9 years old. And I heard that he died, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, oh my God. It was like I had that sudden realization, like, this guy was so meaningful in my entire life. And even though I don't play the viola anymore, like, I use those skills of focus and concentration, like I use them every single day in everything I do. And I felt compelled to go back to New Jersey. There was going to be like a little alumni concert for him. I didn't even know where my viola was at this point. Like, I had to dig it out of the closet, and I found it, and it was like infested with mites. It was pretty disgusting.
I didn't know that could happen.
I didn't either. Now we know. But anyway, I said I have to go back. And so I kind of got the thing back in shape, and I started practicing with my achy fingers and went back thinking I was an absolute insane, crazy, nutso person for feeling this strongly about somebody I hadn't spoken to in 20 years at least. And I showed up in suburban New Jersey to rehearse for this little alumni concert. And I walked in, and there were literally 100 people just like me. And they had flown in from all over the country, and they were accountants and doctors and teachers, and they all came with their old instruments because they felt exactly like I did. It was amazing. It was amazing. It was like Mr. Holland's. It was like Mr. Holland's opus, except for
sure
we didn't sound that good, honestly. But
well, it's because everybody's instruments had mites. That's why.
Stop.
All right, one more quick break. Hang on a second. All right, here's the rest of the episode.
What was it about that music teacher, you think, that had that kind of profound impact on so many people?
So clearly, it was somebody who he was really hard on us. He was he was like the toughest possible teacher. You know, like jealous and like hippopotamus. Like, he was also Ukrainian. He had this very thick accent, and he would scream at us. And but he was
walking in the class. Rehearsal time.
He was really, really tough. But I think ultimately what we all realized, I think the common theme was we realized that this is a guy who was tough on us, not because he thought we couldn't do it, but because he thought we could. Like, he had such high expectations of us. And at the end of the day, it was really affirming. And I think for so many of the people, a lot of those people went on to really successful careers, non-music careers. And I think a lot of them felt, as I did, that the focus and the concentration and the ability to like practice again, which was one of his favorite words, again, was incredibly useful for our lives, not just in music. And what ended up happening was, at the urging of a friend who I was telling this about, one of my husband's clients actually, and he said, you have to write about this. And I'm like, I don't write personal things. That's not what I do. And he said, no, you should share this story. And I ended up writing this piece that ran in the New York Times, that on the op-ed page, that went viral. And that led to this book, which I co-wrote with Melanie Kopczynski, who is my teacher's daughter. We called him Mr. K.
Oh,
Melanie has been for many years. She was a child prodigy violinist, and we grew up together. And she, for many years, has been a violinist with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. She still is. And so we ended up writing this book together. It was a beautiful story because he was a war refugee. He had a really brutally hard life. And just the contrast between someone who had such a difficult life, including, he had a wife who had MS who was really debilitated, who he had to care for. He had a second daughter, also a violin prodigy, who ended up being murdered. It was just, he lived through so much tragedy and yet brought so much joy to so many other people. And it was such a contrast. So Melanie and I wrote sort of alternating voices telling this story of growing up, and, me from the outside as the student with the mean teacher, and her from the inside of what was actually happening in that household. And it was a beautiful story. I loved doing it. It was a passion project. It was also very hard because I'd never written a book, and I'd never written a book like that. I'd never written anything like that. But it was so gratifying. And I think that's what led me to say, I really enjoy the process. I mean, it tortures me, but I enjoy the process. Like, am I a masochist? I don't know. Maybe.
Well, how did you then make the jump from something? I mean, Strings Attached is personal, and you can speak from experience and whatnot. But then I think it's a subject matter jump to go to That's What She Said.
Yes.
Because that's, well, I mean, yeah, you talk about that, because it seems like a completely different topic while still writing a book. How did you decide on that? Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, different research, different process,
yes.
All of that.
I mean, the real outlier was Strings Attached, was the music book, because that was so outside of my typical sphere. But That's What She Said grew out of my reporting. So the reason I wrote That's What She Said is because...
First of all, I love the title.
Thank you.
I laughed out loud, as I'm sure you wanted us to do when you named it that.
I named it that, by the way. This is kind of ridiculous, but it came from my son, not surprisingly, because at the dinner table, you would say, oh my God, my day was so hard. That's what she said. That's like, my son was a dirty joke. I had never seen The Office. Ever.
I was going to say Forward by Michael Scott. Yeah.
I thought my son came up with that. I love that.
And neither did the writers of The Office, by the way. Like, we've been saying that since,
I know, they didn't either. They didn't either.
Yeah.
And apparently it goes back to medieval times. There was some version of that with a priest and whatever. Anyway, I looked it up.
I love that you know that.
I gotta look that up.
But anyway, That's What She Said. It came out of my reporting, which was very much in keeping with my own, with my history. But the reason that I wrote That's What She Said, it came out of what happened was as I started like rising up in leadership at these organizations, I would get invited to these women's leadership conferences. Women's leadership conferences are awesome. And Heather, I don't know if you've been to any, but you're with like a whole bunch of other women and you get to talk about the issues.
They are amazing.
They're amazing because you get to talk about the issues that you face at work, and it's very affirming and it's like a warm bath and it's awesome. But I got frustrated because we were talking about all these issues, but we already knew what these issues were. And I felt like this is like half a conversation and we can only solve half of this problem, right? We can't get to a solution with only half of us talking about it. And
that's why you need allies in the room.
Right, exactly. And because I came from a background where all of my mentors were men and I had a great experience, most of my colleagues were men, all of my sources were men. Like I was surrounded by men my whole professional career, and they were for the most part awesome. Like everybody I worked with, they were awesome. But some of them were kind of clueless. Not because they were misogynistic, but just because they didn't know. They just didn't know. And I'm like, okay. So I wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal, and the headline was Women at Work, a Guide for Men. And
love that.
It was geared to men. And then that got a lot of interest. And so I thought, you know what, there's a lot more to say here. And so I became very interested in turning that into a book because I thought there was plenty more to say, lots of reporting. So if you read the book, there's lots of stories. I actually sought out men who were trying to get this right. And in the process, I also talked about all of the research about the issues that women face at work. So it's a fun read. I mean, it's an easy read, I should say. But there's about 50 pages of research notes in the back because I did a lot of academic and other kind of research.
Yeah. Now, how was that process different than writing Next?
And caveat, or not caveat, interruption, Next is based on a lot of science. And that's what I was going to get into next, because it's not just your opinion as of like the power of reinvention. Here's another book about reinventing yourself, but you've got a lot of research into the science behind all this.
Yes. So that is, this is the reporter in me. This is why I say everything I do is just journalism. I mean, Next, that's what she said was all backed by research. Next, even more so. So the way that I reported Next was I sought out people and asked them, people who had gone through great transitions, whether it was a career change or a life change, or they came back from trauma, or they came back from, failure. I have a whole chapter on failure. How do you come back from it? And I sought out all these people to talk about, walk me through, how did you get through it? How did you get through the transition? But then I also went to all of the scientists and the other experts who study the process of change. So neuroscientists who can actually peer into your brain and see what happens when you have an aha moment. Psychologists who work with trauma patients, data scientists who look at failure, management experts, professors, right, who study career change, all these different experts. And I kind of love that piece of it. I just love diving into the research. And so I interviewed all these experts as well. And then what I did was I had this whole mass of information. And I will tell you, this was actually difficult to corral it because I had so much of it. And so what I did is I actually mapped it out on paper, what were the process that different people described to me. And then I realized that they were all using different words, but they were all describing exactly the same process. And it was, again, light bulb moment. Oh my gosh. Because these are different disciplines that don't talk to each other, but they're actually talking about the same thing.
What is the aha moment brain chemistry? What does that look like?
Oh, it's so cool. So it's actually a microcosm of everything I talk about in the book. So in the book, I talk about something called what I call the reinvention roadmap, which is search, struggle, stop, solution. It's 4 stages. The actually creativity and the aha moment goes through all 4. It's kind of a microcosm of that. So what happens with an aha moment is first you collect random pieces of information, right, that don't seem connected at all, but you're just absorbing them, right? That's the equivalent of the search. Then you might be focused on a problem like, oh my gosh, I need to, write a lyric for this show, or I need to, figure out what's my next chapter in this book, whatever problem that you're trying to solve. I need a new ad campaign, whatever it is. You focus and focus and focus and focus, and you get absolutely nowhere. That's your struggle. Then you take a shower, or go to sleep or go for a run. In other words, you distract yourself from whatever it is you're focusing on, and like boom, all of a sudden the answer's there. It's why you get great ideas in the shower. It's also why, like, if you're doing a crossword puzzle and you can't figure out a clue, and then you walk away and go get yourself a cup of coffee, and you come back and like, oh, there it is. It's obvious, right? It's the same process. So, and that's your solution. So, but the way it works in neuroscience is they've actually, there's a test they give you, this word test they can give you that is meant to elicit either analytical thinking to try and figure out the answer, or it can be insight, what they call insight, which is like an aha moment. You see the answer immediately. And they put people in an MRI machine and they look at their brains. And literally, when you have that moment of insight, there's a part of your brain that lights up. It is literally the flash,
So cool.
the flash of insight is actually literally true. So, but why it is because you have to turn off when you're focused, when you have a problem like that. You know, recall in my roadmap, right? It's search, struggle, stop, solution. In order to solve the problem, you actually have to stop thinking about it. You need to, you know, we all have the executive function, which is like the front of your brain, and it corrals all your thoughts and makes sure that you're being coherent and rational and all those things. You have to turn that off in order for all of these disparate thoughts and things that are floating around in your brain to coalesce, and then they coalesce and then they emerge and they pop out as like an aha moment. And it seems to you like it comes from nowhere, but it actually comes from different connections of different pieces of information in your brain that you didn't consciously connect, but your brain did it behind your back.
I love that. I mean, I know that for myself, and I've seen that for my clients. I'm a transformational success coach, but I have not heard that science behind it, and I cannot wait to deep dive into
There's a great book. I spent a lot of time. There's a guy named John Cunios and another Mark Beeman. They've worked together, and they have a book called, I think it's called The Eureka Factor, and it's a wonderful book that describes in detail how it works. And I spent a bunch of time talking to John Cunios, who's just a really remarkable academic. It's very cool, the research they've done.
That's so neat. I've believed for a long time that you said that we have to turn off our frontal lobe, our executive function, to let this stuff kind of coalesce. And I've sort of believed for a long time that the more intelligent we have gotten over the years, as an evolved species, that the less we trust our gut, trust our instinct, trust that subconscious that is there to do exactly that. While we're trying to consciously rationalize our input and figure out what an answer is, we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by trying to fit a set of rules that doesn't necessarily apply.
Exactly.
Because it's an arbitrary construct that is there based on where you were born and, you know, the people that you happen to run into. But if you just trust yourself, God, I love that. I love that there is actual science behind this.
Yes, there is. There's also science behind. I have another. So I have a whole chapter on aha moments, and then I have another chapter on should you trust your gut. Short answer, spoiler: yes, you should.
Yeah.
Because your gut is similar. Your gut is. Your gut is not always right. I do want to say that it's not always right. But the reason that so often it is right and that it feels right is because, again, it is your subconscious. It's information that you have absorbed and experience that you have absorbed that you're not consciously thinking about it, but your body is sort of ahead of you in understanding that it is correct. I mean, it's the reason why, for example, like experienced chess players can do three-dimensional chess, or they play 20 games at once, and they don't actually have to stop and think about it as they go. They have so many chess moves stored in their head, they don't actually have to consciously conjure it. It's just there. And that's kind of what your gut does.
Oh, that's brilliant.
When we're talking about embracing chance and taking intentional risk, that has to be tied into your gut. And the science behind those patterns are there, those things are there, you just don't know. So you've got to feel into it. Is so cool. You mentioned that you have a chapter on failure, and one of the questions we love to ask on this show is what your relationship is with failure, and to take it another step further, how maybe something that you perceived once as a failure turned out to be exactly the right thing.
Oh, yeah. So, yes, I have a whole chapter on failure, and one of the really big issues is that we don't talk about failure enough. And we all fail. Like everybody fails. I just guest taught a school, a class at the Yale School of Management. And at the end, they asked, what advice do you have? And my advice was, you're all going to fail. Like every one of you is going to fail. And every executive who you meet in this course has already failed. And because it's so important. And, you kind of know it's a learning experience, but we don't actually talk about it enough. And the chapter actually walks through why it does work and what does help you. But, one of the things, I was literally thinking about this when you were reading my CV before, because one of the pieces of advice that I have in the failure chapter is to create a CV of failure. And
oh, I love that.
Yes, this was an idea that I got from the first person I know of who did it was this scientist who has this incredibly amazing resume, and it's full of Harvard and Oxford and Berkeley and and Stanford. I mean, it's crazy how accomplished she is. And she walked me through that, and then she said, "And let me walk you through that again." Before I got this job, I was rejected 15 times. At this fellowship, my professor told me that I would never make it in science. And then she just walked through every single thing, every fellowship she didn't get, and what she did is she actually put that down on paper, and she published it in Science magazine. And that in the science community people went nuts because they're like, oh my God, thank God, because they all fail, finally. Right? Finally. Yeah. And so now she goes around and she actually, gives lectures about failure and CVs of failure. But it's a really great tool because, for one, it shows you the things that you've tried, which is helpful. And it also, reinforces that everybody fails. But it's also really great data. So this scientist, for example, she told me when she put it down in black and white, what she realized was all of her failures, she had started as a biologist. She said all of her failures were in a lab where she had to physically manipulate things, experiment with fish, for example. And it made her realize, it was a great data point for her to realize that actually what her strength is computational biology, not biology where you're doing things with your hands. And so she switched her focus. And so anyway, it turned out to be incredibly valuable. But in terms of my own, personal failures, I mean, we could have a whole other show on that one. But I do think that, and this was true in my reporting on Next, when I talk about those 4 steps, right, that search, struggle, stop, solution, the struggle part is actually the most important part. And this, for me, was actually the most empowering takeaway from all of my research, because I've been there too. Like when my magazine failed and I was suddenly at sea, where am I going to go from here? What am I going to do? Well, what that did was it made me think much more proactively about what have I not done? I hadn't at that point done much in audio, right? And so I started doing some stuff in audio and pre-podcasting, I guess you would call it. I hadn't done that much in video, so I actually I did some consulting over at CNN because I wanted to understand television, and so it kind of forced me out of my comfort zone, and it was an exploration. And in retrospect, it was amazing because it also led me to writing the book, Strings Attached. It led me to kind of getting a much fuller picture of sort of the things I was interested in doing. And it ultimately led me to my next job at Gannett, my next corporate job, I should say, at Gannett, where I was tasked with putting together all these different news organizations into the USA Today network and having them work together, and also in upping our game in video and in social media and in all these other areas where I had now just been sort of tinkering and experimenting. And so I used everything. And this is something I found from in Next when I talked to people, even people who had really, really extreme pivots in their careers, they would say at the end of the day, nothing was wasted, right? One of my favorite guys is a guy who was in the book, is a guy named Chris Donovan, who spent many decades as a telephone repairman. He's a Boston guy, working class family, get a job, telephone repairman. And he had a hobby of drawing pictures of women's shoes. And
Oddly
ultimately,
specific.
but you know what? He for many years he had these shoe ideas, like design ideas, and he would sketch them. But he never thought that that was like a real thing. It was sort of a hobby that he did not share with a lot of people. But ultimately, he did share it with his now husband, who looked at these drawings and said, "Oh my God, you actually have talent. Like you should be a shoe designer." And he ultimately, his stop moment was he was diagnosed with prostate cancer when he was 50 years old. And he said, life is too short. And luckily he recovered. He's all good. But when he recovered, he took early retirement, and his husband gave him the money they'd been saving up to try and renovate the kitchen. And he used it to go back to school, to design school. And he's now a shoe designer. He has his own shoe line. He's awesome. But when you talk to Chris, he will say, like, nothing was wasted. Like, he has incorporated, like, little telephone parts into his shoe designs. He goes,
oh my God, I love that.
He goes to junkyards for inspiration. He says, like, anybody can look at a beautiful flower, right, and be inspired. But he thinks about, like, industrial parts and, like, the beauty in these unusual places because that's where he came from. So nothing is wasted. And I love how he talks about that and how he incorporates his whole life into the designing the shoes. And I found that for just about everybody with these extreme pivots. I mean, there's a JP Morgan economist who was there for 30 years, and he's now a cattle farmer. And again, like such an extreme...
Live your dream.
Well,
go out and live your dream,
But it wasn't
folks.
his dream. It wasn't his dream. He said, like, there's no way that was my dream. But what happened was he bought, as a weekend house, he bought an old farmhouse. And over many years of weekends, he really got intrigued by farming. And when you talk to him, like, that is so extreme. And he'll say, like, no, like, it's my training as an economist. As a cattle farmer, I got to figure out, you know, the economics of it and the supply chain and the marketing of it. Like, all of the things as an economist, I apply to cattle farming. I mean, it kind of makes sense.
It's cool.
Yes.
But what I love about that, though, there's the chance in that is we do our things, we make our dreams come true, and then we get new ones.
Yes.
If you're paying attention, you have an opportunity for new dreams. You take new intentional risks and see what happens.
I love that.
What's the next thing that you think you might take some intentional risk with?
Oh, that is such a good question. Like having just finished the book and now it's out in the world and I'm still
Maybe
in the
a
midst.
vacation.
I think my next thing is vacation. Yes. Yes, I think that would be great. Actually, I know my immediate next thing is I teach a course in journalism at Yale in the fall. And I now that we have Chat GPT and all of this generative AI, I know I have to rethink my syllabus and how do I assign papers? Like,
oh boy.
Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
I know actually that is the immediate next on my plate.
You could ask Chat GPT how to write your syllabus for you.
You are not the first person to suggest that.
It's that's his own podcast interview too. It is fascinating to play around. I did feel like I'm not you guys. I don't have the brand awareness that either you have. But when I asked ChatGPT who Heather Vickery was, it did know. And I was like, oh, okay, I feel kind of special.
But
it totally made up half of my bio. Remember? It was
right.
Like, you've
it
been
does
in all
do
these
that.
shows. I'm like, nope.
Right.
Yeah, it's got some work. Got some work to go.
It's very strange.
Well, mine was perfect.
Yeah, I tried it too. So mine was fine, but then I just put in my name with my husband's name, and suddenly we were co-lyricists of some Broadway play.
Wow! It just decided to go rogue on you. I mean, there's your syllabus. Like, don't trust this shit. You still need to do your research.
Yeah, this class is called "Don't Trust the AI Shit."
Yeah.
That's basically what your syllabus is for this fall.
I think so. And don't use it to cheat on me is the other thing. Right.
Yes.
I will know.
Because I will use it to figure out. Yeah. Well, how can we connect with you? How can we find you? How can we attend your class at Yale? Tell us all the ways.
Sure. So the best way, I have a website, joannelipman.com. And on there, you'll find all information about books and speaking and events. And you can reach me there, too. You can contact me there. And I do read my email and respond to it. And you can buy Next anywhere books are sold. on Amazon or anywhere else, but I always love to encourage people to buy it at their independent local bookstore because we like to support them.
Yes.
Yes. Amazon is brutal. They're currently selling my book for less than it costs to print it. And when I see that, it hurts me. I just have to walk away.
That's painful.
It is
Book publishing is a
painful.
brutal business.
So you're saying I should write a book?
Yes.
You should absolutely write a
Yes.
book.
I don't know what I'd write on.
You'll figure it out.
We'll talk about it later. Yeah.
Let's put a bunch of ideas in a hat and just use.
No.
Actually, I should ask ChatGPT what I should write about.
Yes, there you go.
should. I think you could write a book about how to do things smarter. Because that is something that you do well. Like so you figure out how to systemize things, and other folks can't quite get their brain around that. And you do things that take some people weeks in a matter of hours.
Right. It's
I've
one
known
of
that
those
about you for a long
innate
time.
skills that you may not realize that you have. But also, you guys have so many interesting guests on this podcast that you could probably just pull out nuggets of wisdom, right? About
Let's go,
yeah.
author.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh man.
We're going to embrace chance, Joanne. Thank you for that today. I needed that. No, this is awesome. I also want to say this is the second episode in a row, and this is for our audience members because I want you to embrace risk and take chances, where the guest has said, I read these emails that come in. So thank you for saying that, Joanne. I think people are so afraid to reach out and say, I have an idea or I have a question, or even to compliment or share gratitude. And it's so nice to know that folks on the other end are paying attention. So take the risk, send the email.
Absolutely. Great advice.
Send the cold email. Don't be afraid. Because, it'll get you, like, all it takes is one time. And then all of a sudden, your whole direction has changed.
And your direct.
And your
that too.
directory.
It'll
You've
be
got
both.
additional entries in the directory.
Yes.
Joanne, this was great. I love this. I can't wait to read all of your books and share them and these lessons and just follow and see what you do next. Thank you for being here with us and sharing your intentional risk journey.
My pleasure. It was so much fun to talk to you both. Thanks for having me.
She was awesome.
Yeah. So cool. I could see her journalist researcher brain and everything. I loved, like, she had stats, like she was ready, and this person experienced that and it was cool. But I love the multi-passionate, like using her skill set in so many different ways. And
nothing is wasted. I love when she was talking about that at the end. Nothing is wasted, so you can reinvent yourself multiple times in your life. Every new chapter of your life builds on the previous one. You don't forget the stuff you've already learned and you've already done. And the failure only brings you to where you are now. It's amazing.
It's amazing. And it's such a mental shift because so many people still stay stuck and rooted in, well, I fucked that up, or I made that mistake, or I failed at this, and it damaged me. And it didn't. Like, just decide that it didn't. Decide that you learned from it or it got you where you are. It's kind of a choice. I was fascinated. I mean, look, she took a lot of intentional chance. She put herself out there and is so impressive. But she also got a little lucky that the men she worked for at the Journal believed in her and wanted to see her succeed and kept her, like she said, mommy tracked. And I could feel my whole body react. That's not just a 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 years ago thing. That's a right now thing.
Oh, yeah.
People get mommy tracked all the time. And so that's why it's so important. Who are you spending your time with? Who are your mentors? Who are you choosing to take risks with? Because you want them to have your back. I think Joanne is so cool. I love the work she's putting out there. I can't wait to check out all of her books. I'm particularly interested in the memoir. I love memoirs. So yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, that's what she said is very good. You need to read that. And I can't wait to read next because I feel like every day is a reinvention, or at least a struggle to not let the failures of yesterday continue to weigh you down, right? Like everything is a choice.
Always.
Every single freaking day is a choice to wake up and be like, all right, I'm gonna crush today. Forget yesterday. I'm crushing right now.
Well, because it can't be about yesterday. It has to be about what's happening right now.
But you know what they say about yesterday? I'm just half the man I used to be.
Okay, and on that note, folks,
There's a
you
shadow
have
hanging
been
over
listening to Was It Chance? The podcast about embracing opportunity and taking intentional risk for your creative life. The risk I'm taking right now is to shut this shit down. But we're so glad you guys have been here. Alan, how can folks find us, follow us, connect with us, all that fun stuff?
Oh, man, they can go on the IGs at Was It Chance. That's our account name. And shoot us an email, wasitchancepodcast@gmail.com. We, too, read our emails and also respond to them.
It happens. Thanks for being here, y'all. We will talk to you soon.
Adios.